Or one of the other Protestant denominations, Greek Orthodox or Protestant denominations, that don't hold the Bible as the final authority in all matters of faith, practice, and doctrine. But that's not the point. The point is you should know about these things I talk about and have your own opinion. So even if you disagree with me, even if you find my opinions objectionable, my conclusions you think are wrong, that's fine. That means you have an opinion, you've studied it, you've thought about it, and that's my goal. Because I love world history, all histories, it's just it's amazing. It's like looking for the clues at the scene of a crime. So here we go. I'm going to start with Russia today. Now, moving north of the Islamic lands, let's move to Russia. Russia before the Russians, according to Nicholas V. Ryazanovsky's The History of Russia, was first written about with references to the Slavic tribes by the classical writers of the Christian era, particularly Pliny the Elder and the historian Tacitus. Now, they weren't Christians, but this is the era after Christ. In the 6th century, the Byzantine Eastern Roman Empire historian Procopius wrote about them, as did the Gothic Jordanes. The terms most frequently used to designate them were, quote, Veneti and, quote, Antes, with the first word often referring to the Eastern Slavs and the latter, last, title sometimes referring to pre-Slavic Iranian inhabitants of southern Russia or Goths. Most historians now assume that the Slavs consisted of the bulk of the inhabitants of southern Russia at the time of the biblical Scythians, quote, where there is neither Greek nor Jew, circumcision nor uncircumcision, barbarian, Scythian, bond nor free, but Christ is all and in all. It's Colossians 3:11. Notice how the Bible gives the southern Russians a brief mention as it does China in Isaiah 49:12. Behold, these shall come from far, and lo, these from the north and from the west, and these from the land of Sinim. We get sinology from the study of China. Many Bible students, particularly during the Cold War with Soviet Russia, said that words like Gog, Magog, and Meshach in Ezekiel 38:2 and other places refer to Russia, which is to invade Israel from the north at the end of history. Quote, Son of man, set thy face against Gog, the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshach and Tubal, and prophesy against him. J.M. Roberts, in A History of Europe, refers to the Scythian Russians as trading with the Greeks in the middle of the first millennium BC. By the 9th century AD, East Slavic economy and culture was well developed and advanced. However, we don't get our name for this area from the Slavic people, according to Western historians. The Rus, which we derive the name Russia from, which, according to Gwen Jones, A History of the Vikings, were a tribe, mostly Swedish, of commercial and military adventurers who created the first great Russian republics of Novgorod and Kiev, which started out as armed trading posts. There is actually, though, a great controversy surrounding the influence and significance of the Viking settlement among the Slavic people. While some writers tend to attribute leaps forward in Slavic culture to the influence of the Scandinavian adventurers, others tend, others tend to dismiss their influence as being of minor importance. The traditional histories you will read dismiss the Slavic people as mere benefactors of the superior and more energetic Vikings, while many Russian historians, Ryazanovsky included, state their evidence for the absorption of Viking settlers into Slavic culture, claiming that all attempts to credit Russia's civilization to the Vikings have been vastly overblown. Nevertheless, we have two contenders, at least, for the founding of the great Russian city-state of Kiev. The first were men of Scandinavian stock, or what were called Varangians. The Eastern Roman Byzantine Emperor had a Varangian guard at one time, led by their greatest ruler, Rurik, which Jones says has overwhelming evidence, both literary and archaeological, to support them. And the second, as Ryazanovsky would suggest, were Gothic Slavic people who were only slightly influenced by Viking visitors who were absorbed into their own culture. Durant even admits to the controversy and legendary accounts of Russia's founding that have been taught as factual. So what does that mean to normal people like you and me, that is non-scholars? What it means is that when you read that historians are divided over an issue, any issue, it is wise, if you're interested, in searching out all sides and deciding for yourself. And when, if you go to college, your teacher says that Russia owes its cultural heritage and its name in a larger part to Vikings, particularly Swedish Vikings, you can let him know that this is based on legend, selective interpretation of historical documents, and assumption. And while it may be true, it is a topic not without controversy. The important thing is that Kiev became an important trading city and center of power that was actually able to send a fleet of 200 ships to attack Constantinople in 860 and remained the commercial and political focus of Russia, and it ruled nearly all of Eastern Slavonic tribes. Kiev made 6 attempts between 860 and 1043 to take Constantinople for itself, part of an ongoing attempt by Russians to secure a post on the Mediterranean Sea, which they've been trying to do for millennia. It said that the Russians adopted Christianity because the established church permitted them to drink alcohol while Islam did not, which doesn't say much for either the Russian leaders or the established church of Constantinople or Rome. The Turkic-speaking Khazar kingdom of southern Russia that so dominated the crossroads cities of trade between Europe and Asia was also an influential factor in what we consider to be the history of Russia. They adopted Judaism in the 9th century and were a bulwark against the spread of Islam in Russian territory as well. Russia became Christian under Vladimir, 5th Grand Duke of Kiev, who ruled from 972 until 1015. He married the sister of the Byzantine Emperor Basil II, and from that point on until the Revolution of 1917, Russia in religion, art, alphabet, and coinage, Durant tells us, was a daughter of Byzantium. The Kievan state grew to its greatest under Vladimir's son, Yaroslav, from 1036 to 1054, the year of the Great Schism between the Roman Catholic Church in the West and its eastern counterpart. Kiev then suffered under bitter civil wars and blood feuds between uncles and nephews vying for power. It was sacked once in 1203 and finally destroyed by the Mongol hordes, a mean-sounding name for a large group of invaders attacking you, in 1240. Hordes. Novgorod, under the rule of Kiev, became an independent principality as the Kievan state began to collapse in on itself. It's most significant to our general study for its defense of Russian lands from foreign invaders. The greatest name associated with these epic battles for freedom from foreign occupation was Alexander Nevsky. He was Prince Alexander, known as Nevsky for his victory over a Swedish force at the Neva River. He was born in 1219 and died in 1263, according to Ryazanovsky, and he had to face a Mongol invasion and major assaults on Russia from Europe. The European assaults came mostly from Swedes and Teutonic Knights, with an added dose of Finnish and Lithuanian pressure. The German Teutonic Knights attack is most significant because it represents a continual German ideal of the drive to the east, which culminated in Hitler's attempt to take Russia 600 years later. In the year that Kiev fell to the Mongols, Prince Alexander, only 21 years old, defeated the Swedes. He then turned to face the Teutonic Knights and drove them backwards until the famous Battle of Frozen Lake Chud, also called Peipus, on April 5th, 1242. It has been called the Massacre on Ice and is the subject of many songs and poems, plus an epic movie by the Soviet filmmaker Eisenstein entitled Alexander Nevsky. Between 1142 and 1446, Novgorod fought the Swedes 26 times and German knights 11 times, Lithuanians 14 times, and Norwegians 5 times. The Mongol invasion failed to reach as far as Novgorod, but Alexander chose to pay tribute and acknowledge cooperation with the Mongols, becoming the Grand Prince of Russia under them until his death, wisely realizing that resistance to them was absolutely hopeless. For his patriotic actions and wise diplomacy, he was made a saint by the Russian version of the Greek Orthodox Church. Finally, in 1471, the city surrendered to Ivan III and became absorbed into the Moscow state. Moscow first appeared in writing in 1147. The entire walled city was destroyed by the Mongols in 1237. Daniel, Alexander Nevsky's son, became the rebuilt town's ruler in the second half of that century, called the 13th century. It's important to remember that the years of a century, say 1200 to 1299, are referred to as the 13th century in history, even though it should be 1201 to 1300, but that's another story. It's like saying once you've had your 15th birthday, you are working on your 16th year. In any event, Daniel's son George began expanding Moscow territory and controlled the entire flow of the Moscow River. He married the sister of the great Khan of the Golden Horde, first part of the Mongol Empire, then finally a separate state, and became Grand Prince. Moscow grew in influence, though, through the attempted invasion of the great Turkic conqueror Tamerlane in the late 14th century, through to the disintegration of the Golden Horde and the rise of the Turkish Empire, whose success isolated Russia from Greek culture and church, thereby establishing its own unique identity. Ivan III and Basil III, ruling from 1462 to 1505, asserted complete independence of Muscovite, Moscow-dominated Russia from the Mongols, who had, quote, swarmed over like a horde of wasps much of the world and were now disappearing into history. Territory was increased by conquest, and Ivan III became known as Ivan the Great. Next, we're going to talk about the Jews, then we'll move on to China, um, and then Africa. So stay with me because there's a lot of interesting history to come and stuff that you should know about, whether you agree with my conclusions or little things I say or not, but you should at least know about them. I just want to make you aware of them if you don't. Thank you very much.